SaaS Therapy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of SaaS Therapy, the show where we help you save your most important business relationships, your customers. My name is Todd Kirk, and I am joined with my ever-present and ever-watchful co-host, Casey Trujillo. Hey, Casey, how's it going, my friend?
Todd, you're getting better at these introductions every week. I mean, seriously, you're stepping up your game. Thank you.
Yes, it's a low bar to just be able to speak English, but I have successfully learned the craft. Today we are joined, and I'm super excited about this. Every once in a while, we get to just meet really interesting and fascinating rock stars in the SaaS industry. And today we have a special guest, Josh Mullis, who is the head of information security at Productiv. He is someone who has spent over a decade in cybersecurity, working first at PwC, consulting and supporting businesses, and now has moved over to the other side and is directly in the weeds every day. And as many of you probably realize, security is a topic that can be a sticking point for many SaaS organizations. So we are super excited to have him on the program. Josh, welcome to SaaS Therapy.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Well, Josh, we always like the audience to get to know you a little bit better. So we do a fun game called This or That. So there's going to be two options. You choose the one that resonates most with you. And I think by this, our guest usually, or our audience gets to know our guest in a more personal way. So first question for you. If you could only have one of these items for the rest of your life to eat with your food, would it be ketchup or ranch dressing?
Oh, good question. I do love ranch, but I think I'd have to go with ketchup. I think it gets used a lot more.
Okay. All right. It's fair. I mean, I agree with that. Ranch is very specific in some things that you can do. So that makes sense to me. All right.
It'd be tragic to not have it with my hot wings, but otherwise I think I'd live.
Yeah. Would you rather go to a store where every item is free or a restaurant where every dish is calorie free?
Wow, that's a tough one. I think I would say calorie-free food because I do like to eat, and I eat a lot of it.
I'm seeing a theme around this. And then
unfortunately, the ketchup one's related, so you only get ketchup at this calorie-free restaurant.
Yeah. And then, Josh, you were telling us that you love to travel. So when you're traveling, when you're looking for a hotel, do you sort by price or do you sort by rating?
I think it's a middle ground because I sort by price and my wife sorts by rating. But when I travel, I'm not going to stay in the hotel, Airbnb, or other. I'm trying to be out in the streets and doing things. Same reason, it's the New York vibe, right? I live from New York for the last 13, 14 years anyway. And we have small apartments, and that's why everybody's out in the streets all the time. That's why it seems like an active city because, well, nobody wants to be at home in their tiny apartment. So I kind of take the same approach when traveling as long as it's a comfortable bed and it's relatively clean, I'm good.
And Josh, did I hear that you just got back from like Mount Everest, or were you somewhere in that area? Were you like at a base camp? I saw some picture on your LinkedIn that looked pretty epic. What was that about?
Yeah, so we have a great vendor. It's called SecurityPal. They actually help us, it's probably come up in this conversation today, with some of the go-to-market approaches, answering security questionnaires, things like that. And I was out visiting my team in India, in Bangalore. We have a satellite office there, and they said, "Oh, well, our headquarters is in Kathmandu. Would you like to come?" I'm like, absolutely. And so part of it, their CEO, Pukar, great guy, is actually from Nepal. And had also never been to Everest. And I said, well, let's get a helicopter together. Let's go helicopter up to base camp. We were at 17,500 feet. We had 5 minutes outside the helicopter. And they're like, you have to get back in because you will pass out. There's no air up here. And then we went back down to 13,500 feet. There's a hotel called Everest View Hotel. They only have 12 rooms. All 12 look at Everest. We were up at 4:30 in the morning, saw the entire sunrise come up, not a cloud in the sky. And it was absolutely a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity. So very, very, very cool.
That is awesome. All right. If that's how we're starting this podcast today, Todd, I'm excited. I got high hopes, no pun intended on that, and what we're doing today.
whatever. We all know that it was an intended pun, Casey. Don't even try to disguise it.
So I had that one in
I
the
will
pocket all
say,
day.
Josh, Casey always asks these silly questions at the start, and I always come away with something like that I feel is like a cool little nugget. And for me, the thing was find someone who looks at the world differently than you do. And and the fact that you're like, well, my wife looks at it this way, I look at it this way. That's actually why I love spending so much time with Casey, is because him and I see the world very differently, but it informs our decision making. So it's just, anyway, it's always so good to learn stuff. Josh, having you here, the very first thing that I was really curious to get your take on, because we haven't had a security professional on the show yet, which is actually probably the reason I was most excited to talk to you. But I know that, at least as someone who has had to work with enterprise customers who are purchasing software and working with SaaS vendors who are trying to sell it, the question around security, legality, how you're going to share data, making sure that you make leadership feel comfortable, that is not always the easiest challenge. And so I kind of want to start there with you, if you could. What are some of the things that you see that are sticking points that make it hard for SaaS companies and their customers to actually work together and feel comfortable when it comes to when the topic of security arises?
Yeah, no, good question. A lot of my conversations often anchor back towards risk, the definition of risk, how we address risk. And so when it comes to risk, there's two concepts. There's inherent risk, which is just by nature of doing business with a new vendor, how much additional risk are we taking on? So what kind of data are they hosting? How are they connecting to our systems? What's their retention, right? Like, just at the macro level, are we talking about HR data? Are we talking about confidential data? Or are we talking about just external web scraping, right? Those all have different levels of inherent risk. And then we, as a SaaS company, or any company really that's out there, they implement controls, they implement processes, right, to demonstrate that they're reducing that risk. And so at the end of the day, once you've applied all those things, what you wind up with is the second concept of residual risk. And so when you're talking to a prospect or a customer, that's what they're trying to understand, is what is the risk of doing business with you? We understand you have this amount of data that makes you X risky, but we want to take a look at your controls. That's where the questionnaires come in. That's where the third-party audits come in. And they're trying to get to a level of confidence to say, okay, but the inherent risk is up here, but the residual risk of doing business with you is pretty low. And the upside from a business impact is hopefully potentially high. Like, that's what you're trying to sell as a SaaS provider. And assuming you can get that mix right, then they say, okay, we're comfortable going ahead and doing business with you, of taking on that incremental level of risk, because we think it's very low.
Josh, I had a mentor once tell me your product better increase revenue, reduce spend, and reduce risk. And if that's kind of the three magic areas, right? If I can show you I'm going to increase your profit, I'm going to reduce down expenses, and I can reduce your risk, that's a good thing, right? Now, you at Productiv, you guys have this amazing report that you came out with. And there's some fascinating, it's called the 2023 State of SaaS Spend. They can get it on your website. Do they have to pay for this? Or is this just something you've produced?
It's something we produce every year. We actually have, I think just this year, started breaking it up, and we're kind of issuing a quarterly chunk of it, just to try to keep that fun content flowing to everybody throughout the year. But yeah, it's a report that we've been issuing, I think, for the last 3 or 4 years now, based on what we're seeing in terms of SaaS adoption, SaaS utilization, et cetera.
Okay, so one of the things Todd and I try to always do is give the audience, we have people from customer success, we have people from customer education, we have account executives, we run the gamut in SaaS. And so I want you to help me utilize some of this data. So one of the things I saw in your trend report is you say that that an organization is spending per employee about $9,643 on SaaS. This represents an average organization is doing about 87 applications, is what you're saying in the state of SaaS. But you're also saying there was maybe a little reduction in duplicate applications. If I'm talking to an organization, how do I use that data? So let's say I'm going in against another organization, another SaaS vendor, and we both are in the collaboration space, or we're both in whiteboard collaboration. if I'm making my presentation and I know I want to talk to the CISO and I want to reduce down risk, how am I using some of this data to support me in my argument of why they should choose me? Does that make sense in the question? And I know I'm throwing a curveball at you, and you're on the CISO side of thing, but I'm wondering how I could use all that wonderful information that you've produced.
Uh, sure. And if I veer off from what you're actually trying to get to, feel free to course correct me a little bit. But anchoring back to what you said earlier, right? Of as a SaaS provider, you have to reduce risk, you have to reduce cost, right? Like some of those things, like that's what we're effectively giving by giving the visibility across these things. And so having the visibility within your company of, okay, exactly who's using what. Are there duplicative applications out there? Do you know where all of your data is? So if you're trying to talk to a CISO, right, a lot of it, especially this day and age, is down to the data side. It used to be the perimeter, like protect your perimeter firewalls, right? Then you're good to go. Once you're inside the perimeter, you have access to everything. It's now been brought back to the data point and understanding data workflows. Where's your data going? Where's it housed? How are you protecting it? And so if you have these duplicative systems, well, all of a sudden you have maybe even the same data point flowing into different spaces. And so being able to start to rein that back in and have more intentional visibility on where your data is going as a security professional is super, super important. And there's this concept of least privilege, right? Where you only want to grant access to people who have a business justification, who really need to do that thing. And so being able to restrict those things down a little bit further and to say, okay, like, the data is where we want it and people have access for specific business cases is able to help rein that in. So if you're talking, say we're all in the collaboration space, we're all in the whiteboarding space. Well, you as a security professional, do you want to have to go try to protect 7 digital whiteboards where people can be including anything? Could be highly sensitive information, could be confidential, you could be your data schema, right? Whatever the case may be. You're now having to go and protect each of these and make sure that you have appropriate controls in place, you have appropriate monitoring in place, or do you want to just make that decision as a company, figure out which one of those systems currently has the biggest footprint that offers the most feature-rich set, that meets the majority of your use cases, and then have that application or portfolio reconciliation conversation of, okay, do we really need 7 things that kind of do the same thing? Or do we just make that business decision of, no, let's go all in, let's align here, potentially get more preferential pricing if you end up getting rid of a few systems and doubling down on your license spend. And a fun one that I don't remember if it's in this report or not, but what I've seen across some of our customers is that different pockets, different departments, especially larger organizations, may have contracted with the exact same vendor. So you may have 5 contracts for the same platform because nobody bothered talking to each other when they were going to negotiate. I'm not kidding. Like we've connected to customers and seeing 5 instances pop up. And we're like, did you know you have 5 instances? And there's, you see the kind of head in the hand. And like that's a great opportunity. Again, from a security perspective, to sort of bring that in and get better control. But as a business person, as a finance person, to get better preferential pricing, to reduce cost, to reduce risk, right? All those things that you were talking about that really makes you an impactful provider.
You know, I think it's interesting too, because it seems like from the things that I noticed in the report is that I'm going to oversimplify this so you can tell me if this is way oversimplified, but it seems like organizations, especially IT orgs and procurement and people who are purchasing, they're doing a better job of governing these applications. And maybe COVID or, changes in the market conditions have forced organizations to be better there, or maybe it's something else. And so I'd be curious to get your take. Why do you think it is that like, now people who are buying software are being a lot more intentional around governance than they were even just 3 or 4 years ago? I'd be curious to get your sense as to what are the conditions that are driving that.
Totally. I think it's a little bit the inverse, actually. So COVID is where you saw the explosion in SaaS.
Right. Everybody's just buying everything. Yeah.
Everybody had to work from home. We needed to be able to enable our employees to be as productive as possible in a remote distributed fashion, right? And so it couldn't just be, deploy more stuff on-prem and give people access to local applications. It was, hey, what can we access over the web browser? And so it was just buy. And you also have to look at the market conditions where everybody thought at the beginning of COVID, that, oh, like we're going to have a bad recession, everything's going to pull back. It was actually the opposite. You just saw this explosion in spend, especially in the tech space. And then eventually, backtrack 2 years ago, you start to see finally that recession sort of caught up. That balloon of IT spend had to start getting restricted back. And so all of a sudden, there wasn't as much investment money. So if you weren't a public company or whatever, and you're trying to get your Series C or D or whatever, you needed to have your house more in order. If you are a large company, well, you still need to, and you're a publicly traded company, people still want return on their investments. They want their dividends. They want whatever. And so all of a sudden, more governance started to come in. And as the market's gotten tighter and tighter, it's been more and more restriction. Not necessarily restriction on spend, more intentional spend. And I think I may have my data point wrong, but what we were seeing is that whereas it used to be, I think 4.5 to 5 people would touch a deal from the customer side, that's now increased to like 7.5 or 8 people that touch that deal. There's more rigorous approval flows. There are things like our product actually provides workflows for things like renewals and intake. And it's a no-code builder, so you can go in and you can make it map to whatever your existing process is, where you want it to be. But we're seeing even some of our customers who adopted those workflows that have now added in additional steps to where if it's over X amount of dollars, it has to go to the CFO for approval now, whereas before maybe it was a manager in procurement or a director in procurement that could make those decisions. So there's just a lot more rigor. Deal cycles are stretching out into a longer stage. And so everything you're seeing is just people are just being intentional with where their money's going.
Would you say that is, so maybe the place where I missed it, and this actually makes a lot of sense, is COVID is like everybody just opened the gate and said go because we got to figure out how to survive. And what we're seeing is even a correction back to maybe more norms. So, like, I guess, would you say, have we overcorrected and we're making it harder than it was pre-COVID, or are we just returning back to a state that was pre-COVID?
I think it's a little bit knee-jerk, probably isn't the right word for it, but it's a little bit of, hey, it was way out of control. We got to get our hands back on it. I don't know if it's too restrictive yet, but I also think it ebbs and flows with the market, right? So as investments are back up, as inflation starts to go down, as all of these things happen, you're going to start to see more investment money come in from the private equities or the venture capitalists or whoever it is. And as that money starts to come in, then all of a sudden you start to see a little bit of a lax on it, right? AI is obviously the buzzword, and I'm surprised it even took me 12 minutes before we finally said it, but right. And so you're now starting to see.
Thanks you probably. So
what's that?
I said our audience thanks you for not going straight to it, because that's
I know. It makes me sad that I even did it, but it's just being realistic about the market. You're starting to see more investment in the AI space, and so there's more money coming in from the VCs into these companies, which is why you're seeing all these SaaS providers and everybody in general, but like a lot of the SaaS providers are racing to get their AI feature out because that just opens up a little bit more money to come in, and it becomes a selling point, a differentiator with customers, right? Because they're like, hey. It's like, think about the SaaS space. Like, we have so many SaaS providers. Well, that's a lot of data. How do we start to rationalize this data? How do we really enable our employees so they're not having to go look in 17 different systems to find the data or download it and try to synthesize it, make it to a thing? Can they just say, give me a 5-sentence synopsis of this thing and then be able to pull it in? And so I think you're going to start to see more spending in that space. And I think some of our data actually lends itself to that. I think unfortunately, on the shadow IT space, we're talking about risk. The number one shadow IT application right now across everybody that we're seeing, unsurprisingly, is ChatGPT. Obviously, a very powerful tool, kind of at the leader of all of this stuff. But a lot of companies, because of the risk of data making its way into the training model or being exfiltrated accidentally or whatever the case may be, have said, no, we're not approving it. We're not going to pay for it. And then what do you find? Well, any John, Josh, or Todd with a credit, corporate card goes and expenses the $20 a month so that they can try to use it to enable their own day-to-day workflows, right? So we're actually seeing that whether intentionally or through unapproved channels, there is more spend kind of going into some of this, the AI space.
Yeah, Josh, so help us understand how to do this. Again, we have a lot of different SaaS organizations that listen to this podcast. And in your report, you talked about, okay, it used to be collaborative tools, and now the competition is going to be against AI tools. So what are some best practices people should be thinking about around this? Because I just came out with my AI tool. My competition just came out with their AI tool. The direct customer that we sell to, there's one department that uses my tool, another department that uses my competition's tool. It seems like this AI governance is going to start to take over, or how do I use which AI tool when? From your point of view, what's some things that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, for sure. Going back to my old consulting days, put my hat on. You always have to start with a framework. You have to start with a policy, right? You can't just go try to attack each vendor. Attack's probably not the right word, but go review each vendor, and everything's ad hoc, and you're not going to have a standardized process in place. And so, like, we even did this internally back when, I don't know, probably just a couple months after OpenAI and Google Bard and all these things kind of started going to market. We went and did a bunch of research, wrote a whole policy, did some education and awareness internally to users. What does it mean to be constrained versus unconstrained? Constrained being that you have contractual terms in place, right? So you can hold the vendor accountable. Unconstrained is your public chat GPT, right? If you put it in there, it's gone, it's out there. And so just doing some of that training and awareness, looking at things like bias awareness if you're going to use a model. Really just helping our engineers, because we do have an AI capability as well. We call it Sidekick, so that you can just ask questions of your data for your SaaS portfolio. And before we started building any of it, we had to understand all of those, the impacts of it. So like setting that as your foundation, and then having a process for how you review vendors, just like you would any other third party security assessment. What is the data that's going into it? What kind of model are they using? What restrictions do they have in place? Do they have sort of human reviews of anything? Is our data potentially leaving the system? Is it being trained into the model? What contractual restrictions do we have in place if something were to happen? Is it in line with our normal expectations? So like limitations of liabilities on breach of contract or anything else that would happen. And then understand, is there actually a business use case for it? Just because the platform has AI doesn't mean you have to turn it on. And this was actually a decision that we made internally for our product, which was all existing customers had to explicitly opt in, because we don't want to be seen as forcing something onto a customer that they may not be comfortable with. We want to get them confident. We want to bring them the information. We have our security sheet that, like, here's our architecture, here's our controls, here's what we are and aren't doing with your data. But we want to maintain that transparency and get that confidence from the customer. I've been on the receiving end of this as our head of cyber, where some of our vendors have tried to just force turn it on. I've made a big hoopla about it of, hey, listen, you can't, I don't know what the back end of this is. You haven't walked me through this. You can't just force this out. Like, it needs to be opt-in. And then going forward for net new customers, well, that's just part of our tech feature offering. And so that's just something you review as a part of it. And we have a clause in our contract that covers it and all that kind of fun stuff. So it's really just, nothing changes, right? As much as they say, as much as things change, they stay the same. It's the new cloud. It's the new whatever, which is, it's just a feature. And you should treat it just like you would any other vendor, any other feature. Is there a right product fit? Is there an actual use case for it? What's the cost associated with it? What's the benefit? Who do we want to purchase it for? Does it meet our security requirements? And if the answer to all of those is yes, then great. It's just like any other vendor, we move with them. If the answer to any of those is no, I'm not confident in how you're protecting our data, I don't think there's a good use case for it, you're overcharging us, I don't see the business benefit for it, then no, we're not going to enable that feature. Does that help at all?
Oh, it's so good. Actually, Josh, I love it, because the thing that comes to my mind, and I think about a lot of the people who actually listen to our show, a lot of them are very much they work in SaaS either as a customer success manager or a salesperson, who are running into these barriers where, the CIO or the CTO or the CISO has like raised the red flag. But the thing that's interesting is, the personality types on that side, like the people who are trying to talk to the security people inside of an organization, they don't see the world the same way, right? Like, I'm sorry, Casey does not stress about like any sort of security issues. I just know that for a fact. It's just not in his mentality. So I'd be curious, maybe could you help us understand like what is the mindset and the personality type of someone who goes into information security to like help maybe you can help shrink the gap between those who care and those who know and those who don't care and don't know.
I think when it comes to security, there are, is a gross oversimplification, but more or less two camps, right? And I think a lot of it depends on your background, how you got into the space. Some of it is you find the security professionals, and I think unfortunately, I think it's a little bit of a detriment to our profession, where they come in, they're no people, right? They're like, user can't be trusted. We need to restrict everything down. We need to add as many hurdles as possible. Right. And that's why I think often some businesses kind of have a bad taste in their mouth with their security team. Like they're just constantly trying to tell us no. The other camp is business has to go on. Like if my company is not bringing in money, I don't have a paycheck. So like, how do we enable the business to do what they need to do to earn money, to be successful, but do it as securely as possible? So like anytime any of my team brings in a new vendor and we're doing the assessment, it's almost never no. The answer is almost never no. It's yes, but here's what we need from them. Here are the commitments we need from them. If maybe there is a gap in some of their security tooling or capabilities, okay, well, we'll give you limited access for now with the expectation that they fix this in the next 3 months. Before we start putting any sensitive data in or otherwise, and then we go back and validate and make sure they've closed that thing. So like, how do we enable people to be able to use the tools they want, to be able to get access to the services they want, but do it in a secure fashion? And so knowing which type of security organization you're talking to is super important. Because if you're talking to the no people, okay, well, then you're going to have to double down. You're probably going to have more of a white glove approach to get them comfortable. Again, the inherent versus residual stack side of it, of the controls you have in place, that the residual risk of doing business with you is low. That like you're there to answer their questions, you're there to meet their needs. If you're on the yes but people, okay, that's probably going to be an easier deal. But it's kind of important to suss out who you're talking to early as to like how much engagement you need to have with that security team and how early on. And so for my team, for the go-to-market side, I've actually put together some documentation. Again, the good old consultants they love decks. So put together our deck on here are the different, and I aligned it, try to talk the same language as my sales team. So like S0 to S6. So like, is it pre-deal? Have we actually had a conversation with them? Is the deal moving forward? Are we getting into contracting? And so broke it out by their phases and actually put what they should be expecting from a security perspective at each stage. So like here, we need to have an NDA in place. You should be offering our NDA because it's usually whoever's first to the punch. So like a lot of times that's the paperwork you land on. So like, hey, we want to talk to you. I'm sure you want to talk to us. We want to help protect you before you start sharing any potentially sensitive information about how you do things as a business. Here's our MNDA. Like, let's get that signed. At this stage, they're probably going to start thinking about a security questionnaire. Well, don't wait till the end. Go ahead and start asking for it. Or better yet, and this has kind of been where the market's been going from a governance risk compliance side, is trust centers. Everybody has a trust center now. They're like, here's our website. Ours is trust.productiv.com, right? Everybody's kind of got a different flavor of it. But it's mostly the same thing. Here's our SOC 2, here's our pen test, here's our architecture diagram, here's some of our policies, here's like a white paper or whatever. And so if you're more proactive about pushing some of that stuff out, what I think it does, at least like the experience that I've had, is it actually shows more of that transparency, shows that you're willing to come to the table and you want to proactively get their confidence, earn that trust. And also, a lot of times it'll help circumvent some of the security questionnaires. If you can say, hey, actually, you can self-service from our SOC 2 and our pen test and all these other things. So one, you're not waiting for us to answer a questionnaire for you. And you can pull down and store and do whatever you want with all the documentation as opposed to all this like back and forth with it. And since I've implemented that about 1.5 years ago, our deal, security has been more of a differentiator in the deal cycle. We've stopped being a bottleneck, which is a huge thing to deals. It's like my first few weeks when I took over, I felt like every other week, one of my AEs, my account executives, was coming to me and saying, "Hey, I need you to answer this questionnaire. It's holding up this deal. Like, we're trying to get signature on Monday. It's Thursday. We need this questionnaire done." You're like, you could have asked for this 2 months ago. Like, this cycle has been going on for 4 months. And they're like, yeah. So like, as soon as I put this in, I don't think we've had a single issue where security's been the bottleneck. And honestly, we've circumvented a lot of questionnaires from customers because we're like, "Hey, here's our latest information. It's all out there. It's all like at your fingertips. Anybody from your company can request it." And it's just made things much smoother.
Josh, a bunch of great nuggets in there, and I've always wondered about who does what NDA, and now you've proven my theory right. It's the first one to get it out there, so great. I'm taking that one away. What's so unique about your role, and then the company that you work for, Productiv, you bring IT, procurement, and finance together all in one platform. You have this amazing report that you produce. What are maybe one or two insights because of who you are, what your platform does? What are one or two insights that you think people will find of interest that maybe they don't know? And you've already dropped a lot of nuggets on us, but what are maybe one or two other ones that we should be thinking about?
Good question. Our platform does a lot, right? We're a SaaS management platform. We give visibility into your license usage across your app portfolio. We help provide information around renewals. We provide benchmarking, so you over or underpaying, right? But I think one of the biggest things we really help bring is consistency in your process, making sure you have the visibility, you have the data to be able to make informed decisions, right? And I would say, like, some of the things that I've seen, because we eat our own dog food. I'm called customer zero internally because we use Productiv and Productiv. And a lot of the things that I've seen, we've already kind of hit on some of them, which is redundancy in platforms. And so over the next 6 to 12 months, as contracts expire, we're actually going to be reducing some of our stack around the collaboration platforms. You don't need Asana, Miro, Zoom Whiteboard, Google Whiteboard, Jamboard, or whatever it's called. So, there's 7 different flavors of it. Do we really need all of those? No. Let's figure out what the right one is for our company. Let's start to reduce that. Getting better management and visibility around your true ups. So a lot of vendors have monthly or quarterly true ups, and those things will nickel and dime you. We got hit. I won't drop the vendor name, but actually a big proponent of the vendor. They've been really great for us, but we mismanaged it. They weren't cheap. They're like a $1,500 license for one license. And because we weren't on top of the true up for it, we were accountable for the next nine months because it was our first quarterly true up after signing the contract. And we're a small company, right? And so $1,000 here, a couple $1,000 there, those things start to add up and they chip away at the bottom line. And so just having better visibility into those, making sure you're making intentional decisions around license allocation and license reclamation is a big one, right? Contractors, this is a problem for everybody. How frequently are people actually sponsoring managers, notifying you when the contract are wrapped up? Okay, great. Are you still paying for that license for another 2 months, 5 months, 6 months? As a security professional, I hate that from a risk perspective because that just means there's now there's a license out there that may be unmanaged or orphaned or otherwise. But from like a business perspective, is that an extra 5 months you're paying for a license? Did we not know they were gone and we intentionally trued up on another license, not knowing that we could have just reclaimed that one and passed it over? And so it's those little hygiene things over time that really kind of chip away. So there's the bigger scale piece, which is, are we paying for multiple vendors that may be overlapping? So that's a pretty big cost savings part. And then within the applications themselves, are we appropriately allocating based on business need, so that we're only paying for what we need, right? And so you kind of get those two things managed, and then that's why I said we have our renewal workflows, which actually I love because we use them all the time internally. Our workflows automatically kick off. We have it set for 90 days before our renewal, which gives us plenty of time to right size our seats, go talk to the managers as needed, get input, do a survey if we need to figure out what does the next right size look like. And then we're proactively going to our vendors to start that conversation, as opposed to 2 weeks before your vendor reaches
Right.
out and goes, "Hey, you should add 10% for growth." And you're like, "I guess that sounds right." Not understanding that, like, well, maybe we actually need to reduce licenses by 20%. Um, and then just getting visibility into actual license tiers and things like that. So, like, the example I always give when explaining what our product does is like Zoom, right? Everybody knows Zoom. Great collaboration platform for digital meetings, remote meetings, etc. Say you have 1,000 employees. Your vendor is going to come and say, "Hey, you probably need 1,000 licenses." And you're like, "Yep, great, probably makes sense." But really, 30% of your staff may be front of house maintenance, whatever the case. They're never joining any calls. 30% of them may just be joining calls, which you can actually use the Zoom basic license for. So anybody who during the pandemic was joining calls and you're like, "Oh, we only have 45 minutes, let's have our fun and then hop off." Like, that's the Zoom basic license. And then maybe only 40% really need a true license. But if you were to go into the console and try to figure that out, like, how do you actually determine that? How do you determine what the right license count is for your company? And then, like I said, your vendor comes, at your renewal time, says 10% for growth. And you're like, "Yeah, my company's going to grow. Let's do that." So it's really getting better visibility on when I was talking about assignment to the right people based on the business needs. That's really what we're talking about. Do you really need this platform, or did we just blanket assign it because we didn't
Yeah.
actually know? We didn't have the data points to make that decision or determination.
And Todd, I can see why you were so excited to have Josh on, because I think, again, my hat is always a seller hat, Josh. So I'm hearing you talk through it, and I'm like, okay, I'm usually not in the room when these discussions are taking place. So if I was, let's say, pretend I was the account executive for Zoom, or I was the CS person for Zoom, I'm saying, okay, I should know my customers' personas. I should know how they're using Zoom. I should then be able to recommend, here's why. I might even recommend to you to decrease something, because on the other end, I'm going to upsell you on your heavy accounts because I know you're using 6 other whiteboarding collaborations. I know security is a big deal for you, and I'm going to pitch the Zoom whiteboarding or whatever it is inside of that system. And again, I got to think through my customer, and I got to think through the strategy that they're talking about behind the doors that I'm not part of. And I need to button up and know that. So that insight and that detail that you just gave us, I hope that all people in CS, all people in AE had their ears listening, because that's what you need to do to present a proposal that makes sense, that resonates, and why they're going to choose you versus somebody else. And Josh, I see your head shaking. What about that resonated in what you were thinking about?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of making sure the product is the right fit for the company, even us, right? If we go try to pitch you and you just say, "Hey, listen, like, these aren't quite the use cases we're looking for. We're looking for these other use cases," and we don't do it, I'm great. Let's stay in touch if things change in the future. Because if I push you and I try to, like, coerce you and try to be like, "Oh, but maybe we could," or "Maybe we have this to a roadmap," and it's just not the right fit, you're going to churn a year later. And the company's going to have a bad taste in their mouth, and they're going to go talk to their friends, and they're already going to have a bad taste in their mouth before you ever come open the door to try to talk to them. And so I'm a big proponent of selling things to people that want to be sold to. Like, let us solve the problem that you have if we have the solution for it. And so if it means, like, we sell 10% less licenses to you, but you're super happy with the product, and we actually make sure that those features are meeting the needs that you have. Like you said, the whiteboard. By the way, we use them in Zoom internally. Huge proponent of the platform. They're great, and they're constantly rolling out new awesome features. But it's also about making sure that we're appropriately allocating to people who need those specific features. We're not just giving everything to everybody because, right? And I don't think they've ever pushed that on us, but that goes for any vendor, right? Of like, let's make sure that we're actually meeting your use cases, that you're happy with what we're providing you. And then, yeah, as we roll out more features, we upsell you, right? I'm a big proponent of paying people just prices for just services, as long as we're meeting your needs. And you see the additional value, great, let's upsell. Let's get some more money from you that way. But I don't want to get money from you by just pushing things on you that you don't necessarily need. And maybe you're not an informed enough customer to even know that's not what you need. But eventually it'll come out in the wash of like, "Oh yeah, we paid for all the bells and whistles. We're using 60% of what you sold us." And then a year later, either they're churning or they're trying to downgrade on services from you. So,
Josh, okay, so I'm a big nerd, and I know we're running short on time here, but I can't help but think of goofy analogies that might be helpful for this conversation. And recently I learned, because I'm a nerd again, that most people don't know why most whale researchers, marine biologists, have no idea why whales breach the water and actually go out and then slam their bodies back down. Like they don't know, they think maybe it's for fun, just because they're smart and they get bored. But the prevailing theory is that the reason they breach, and they have to do this regularly, is to shock their system to get rid of parasites. And so what's interesting to me in this whole conversation is I think it's, goes down to this point of, do you understand your customer? If your customer's a whale, periodically they may have to breach just so that they can make sure that they don't get sick and die. And so in this conversation, I think it's helpful for both sides here to try to understand each other. And I think you've done a masterful job of helping us to understand maybe why every once in a while, an organization might do a shock to its system. And it's really been insightful. So, as we get near here to the end of our conversation, Casey and I always like to ask one final question of all of our guests. And it's SaaS therapy, right? So any good SaaS therapy or any good therapy session is always going to end with some sort of homework assignment, essentially, right? If you could be a therapist, put yourself in the therapist seat today, and you could give any homework assignment to our audience today, what would that actually be?
I would say, think about when the last time you went and took a holistic view of your SaaS portfolio, your IT portfolio in general, but like your SaaS portfolio, since it's SaaS therapy. Are you just renewing because it was already in place? Do you have redundancies and opportunities to reconcile your internal tech stack? Are you still getting the value? Have you right-sized the licenses lately? Do you know if you have the information needed to right-size the licenses internally? And I'm not saying you need to do this like every month or every few months, but at least once a year. Take a look at the portfolio and have that internal conversation of do we have redundancies? Do we have good hygiene in terms of our app portfolio? Or are we still kind of just spending because that's what we've done for the last 3 or 4 years? And you'd probably be surprised how many redundancies and overlaps. It may not be exact like a 1-to-1 match, but they're probably pretty close in there as an opportunity to really provide more value to your internal company.
Josh, it's been wonderful having you. That's great advice. Thank you to all of our listeners who've joined us today. Check out Josh I assume on LinkedIn. Check out Productiv. They're an awesome company. I guess, is that the best way for people to find you, Josh? What's the best way for people to find you moving on from this?
I'm on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with people. So it's just Josh Mullis. You can also find our information on our website, productiv.com. There's no E because we're a tech startup, which means you either double letters or drop a letter. But yeah, you can find our contact me information on the website. There's also more information on our product, the services we offer. And if it is something that we can help you with in terms of your portfolio management, feel free to reach out. Like I said, if we're not the right fit, that's okay too. Feel free to stay connected. And if there's anything we can ever help with, please let us know. Let me know.
I love it. Josh, thanks so much. And thanks everyone again. And have a great rest of your week. SaaS Therapy is brought to you by Brainstorm, the SaaS platform for SaaS adoption. Learn more at brainstorminc.com.